This is Pam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Khushboo Chabria. You're a neurodiversity specialist, a DEIB champion, and transformational leader. And
Mhm.
want to welcome you to the Pam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
Good. Thank you so much for hosting me today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, I think it's really important to talk to people from all over the world, and neurodiversity is something that I really champion myself. My daughter is disabled and is a neurodiverse. Is actually she runs a artistic. She's an artist and she runs a a kind of online gallery for
Mhm.
artists around the world who are have like issues with disabilities and neurodivergent. So
Mhm.
I'm totally into what you're saying. And we're kind of living in an age in America where people are kind of rebelling
Correct.
against that. And I'm like, because like, they somehow think that we're the enemy. I
Yeah. I
don't
mean,
understand
I
it,
feel
but
like
that's
the
kind
work
of
that
what
your
we
daughter is doing is so important and so needed.
yeah, especially
Um,
in the art world. Like, if she's an
especially
artist
in
and
art
there tends
world.
to be this kinda gotta be in person,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And she's working with people who have disabilities, they can't be in person.
Right.
And, and it's kinda like they people just thought after COVID, "Well, we'll get rid of all the virtual stuff." It's like, there's reasons to still have it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important thing. I was actually talking with someone this morning about the importance of remote work and how many people with disabilities have gained and retained employment since COVID because of that possibility. And we absolutely need that avenue for people with disabilities for sure, right?
Yeah, and there seems to be a lot of ableism among some of
Mhm.
the Fortune 500s, big companies. It's like these executives making decisions like, I think everybody should be in office.
Right.
So then they don't consider what we're just talking about. Like
Correct.
and the thing is, I am in my day job. I am a remote worker. I'm a software
Mhm.
designer. For
Right.
many years, I decided to go stop being a road warrior so I could
Mhm.
be home with my daughter, and my wife is disabled. And
Mhm.
so, it's not just that I don't want to be on the road. I used to be on the road for years.
Right.
Just I decided I need to be able to balance my artistic life and my family responsibilities and still be able to do a job. And so it's not about people just like
Yeah.
wanting to goof off. It's like
Absolutely.
seems to be like the CEO is like, oh, they're goofing off. It's like, no, that's not what it is.
And what we believed about productivity and remote work was proved to be wrong, right? People were more productive. People were more aligned with their other responsibilities. People were more able to spend time with their families. And I do want to say, Phantom over here, that I don't think people necessarily make policies to exclude people. They maybe just aren't really aware of how many people that decision could affect. But it's worth noting that even though we as a society were collectively able to show that productivity was not affected, and a lot of companies made a lot of money during COVID, yet here we are, and the policies are kind of going back based on other people's interests, not taking into account what we've learned, right?
Yeah. In addition, I mean, some of it is because the people own these buildings
Correct.
and they've got this office space, and you have to make a decision. Like I'm working with a smaller company that made a decision a long time ago that
Mhm.
they're virtual because they have people all over the world and they don't have a lot of office space. But there are
Correct.
these big companies that have these big offices. So there was
Right.
a decision that was going to need to be made. Do you
Yes.
sell that office space and go with what the world actually wants? Because there are people living in,
Mhm.
in the Caribbean working. There are people living in Hawaii, people who would move to places that they felt would be better for them and their family,
Correct.
and they're not
Correct.
near their office anymore. Right. And so then they just like threw all that out the window and say, oh, we gotta fill this office space. And some of it's bottom line. I mean, that's one thing. It's not the only thing, but
Of course,
one
of
thing came to
course.
mind. But it's just it seems like being inclusive is like, oh, that's foo-foo. Oh,
Right.
that's like people tend to not be open-minded. Being an
Mhm.
artist, I tend to be more open-minded,
Right.
less in the canon. Because a lot of
Exactly.
times when you're an artist, like, you were trained on the canon. You were trained on, like, classical music. I'm a
Right.
pianist, and I was trained on all the greats, but then when you start to deviate, you go away from it, right? You start to experiment, you kinda break the rules.
Right.
You learn the rules, and then you learn to break the rules because, like, it's not fun to stay in the box. And so
Agreed.
and some people don't live in a box, right? They have a different mindset, and so
Absolutely.
it's just, I think if you're more inclusive, you'll find there's a lot of things that are, like, outside the
Mhm.
bell curve
Correct.
that are actually better for your bottom line. But, you might believe that everybody being, like, in the certain criteria, like, everybody's gotta
Mhm.
be the same. It's, like, not necessarily. It's, like, that's not everybody's secret sauce is being the same. Everybody's
Absolutely.
secret sauce is their individuality.
Yeah, and the idea and this is just talking, like, kinda like big picture. The idea that all of us are designed in the same way to be able to sit in front of a laptop for 8 hours a day, to commute 3 hours a day, to go to work and come back. A lot of our bodies are not designed for that. And even if you ask 2 neurotypical people that have no diagnosis or no semblance of neurodivergence, how to solve one problem, how likely is it that they're gonna have the same approach?
Yeah, man, that's what you want. Like, when I'm in a room doing a joint application decision,
Mhm.
tree, we're doing JAD development, agile development, whiteboard stuff,
Yeah,
we want people to speak up. And
correct.
over time, people do speak up because there's no fear. There's a
Right.
lot of problems with, like, safety and fear.
Yeah, this is
So it's
what we
like,
call psychological safety, right?
yeah, people don't speak up because if they speak up, they're like, "Oh, I might be wrong,"
Mhm.
or it might be, not the idea everybody else has. So then they feel like the wolf's at the door, and it's kind of really, really old kind of human
Yeah.
trait. That if you're in the tribe and you speak against the chief, he's gonna throw you out, and the wolf's gonna be on you. And so that you don't speak up and go against what they're saying in the leadership because you
Yeah,
might get kicked out.
correct.
And so that's a hard thing to do because, like, you think, well, the wolf's at the door. I don't want to risk it.
Yeah, and one of the things we teach organizations when we talk about this specifically is that when you're holding a meeting and you recognize that there are certain people who are never speaking up or sharing ideas, that you as a manager or meeting facilitator solicit people's feedback because neurodivergent people often don't know when to interject in conversations. And as someone with ADHD myself, in a one-on-one conversation, I can easily speak up and engage with you. But if you put me in a meeting, it's very likely that you won't hear a lot from
Yeah,
me.
the whole group dynamic. It's like I was
Correct.
a sociology major, and
Mhm.
kinda got the macrocosm, and got the microcosm.
Correct.
When you're in the macrocosm, you're in a group
Mhm.
situation, like, you might, when you're on the different limits of human behavior,
Right.
different the range that you could be in, you might not feel
Mhm.
comfortable or feel you have a permission structure to be involved because
Correct.
all the alphas, all the people who are very aggressive, they always take the lead, and then, body language and people
Right.
look like, you feel, like, intimidated, and they might
Absolutely.
intimidate you on purpose because they wanna be in the lead, so it's human behavior. So, like, if
Yeah.
you feel like you're not welcomed,
Yeah.
you're not valued, like, when people don't
Absolutely.
ask the people on the floor,
Correct.
like, "Is there something we could do better?" It's like, "No, the engineer is perfect, we can't change it." It's like,
Right.
wait, but, when you have a company that actually listens to the people in the assembly line,
Mhm.
and they tell the engineers, like, "This is actually not the best way to do this. This has got a lot of problems."
Exactly.
And if the engineer has an open mind and they're willing to listen to the feedback, they'll actually fix the product. But if
Yeah.
you've got a big ego and it's like, "Well, you can't tell me. I went to Carnegie Mellon. You can't tell me anything." It's like, "Okay."
I mean, and this is the thing, right? I think one of the things that comes in the way of true DEIB work is the fact that we have these hierarchical structures and power dynamics that we're not willing to look past in order to have true inclusion. Because if you do think about it, true inclusion means not just for the neurodivergent person, it's also for the only woman in the room,
Yeah,
or it's for the person who speaks another language other than English, or for the person who doesn't understand the cultural references in a joke you just made about the Super Bowl, right?
yeah.
So we have to think of why it is that inclusion is important. And to this point, I will say, talking about the benefit that inclusion brings, the level of performance that teams have when they have psychological safety, the level of creativity and innovation we have seen in organizations that have improved psychological safety. I mean, there's a lot of research there. It's just about sort of connecting the dots for people and saying
Well,
it
it's all
does
the
work.
bias. You have institutional bias or organizational bias.
Mhm.
I was in an organization. I worked with a lot of big insurance companies,
Right.
and I got into like a PMO, it's like project
Mhm.
manager's office, and I had just
Mhm.
been in like Japan for 2 years
Wow.
working for the company. I come in, and the office was not very diverse.
Right.
I was the only person that looked like me in the room,
Uh-huh.
and the executive come and tells me, "Well, we can have diversity of thought rather than diversity of, like, person. Like, we don't have to
Mhm.
have diverse people. We can have
Mm.
the same people who've been in the same country club and same groups,
Mhm.
like, they can
Mhm.
have diverse thoughts." They're like, "Okay, really?" 'Cause
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, because I was just in Japan for 2 years. I had
Right.
different ideas, and my ideas were butting against their ideas, and he came up with this response. I'm like, "Okay, well, this group is not the right fit for me."
Right.
Right off the bat, the guy doesn't want is kind of going a roundabout way to say, "I don't need to be there."
Correct.
So I'm like,
Correct.
"Really?"
And it's unfortunate, but those views still exist. There's a lot of people who will say, "Well, why should I invest in all of these things and do all of these trainings? It's so much more work for me. It's so much more to manage for me. Why can't I have cultural fit?" Right?
Yeah,
What is cultural fit? I mean, is
I
it
don't know.
based on your mission and your vision and your values,
But don't
or
we
is
have
it
a
something
global
else?
economy? Don't you sell to multiple sectors? And if
Correct.
you've got the same people who are in the same clubs, the same church, the same places they go, it's like, how
Mhm.
are you really gonna understand your customers, right?
Correct.
Do you really have no women on the board and you have no so you're not thinking about
Yeah.
what women want. You're not
Mhm.
thinking about what people like me might want,
Right.
I'm part Cherokee and Blackfoot, and somebody starts making a reference, making fun
Mhm.
of indigenous people, they don't even know they've got a person that's like part Cherokee in front of them, and they say that, thanks. That's the
Wow.
problem is like the cultural kind of blind spots that
Mhm.
people get because they think, well, it's okay, it's just a joke,
Yeah.
and they don't know like, well, then you push down other people
Correct.
to kind of make yourself feel good. It's like a frat boy kind of behavior, and that kind of
Yeah.
frat boy behavior, to me, it's not very productive.
It's not.
I don't see how you're actually
Yeah.
cutting edge with a
And
frat
and
boy attitude.
one thing that people don't talk about enough is that when there is toxicity in a workplace culture, it builds, it grows, right? We call this like a mushroom syndrome. It grows underground and until finally people are like, "I don't wanna work here anymore. This company is not aligned with my values. I don't feel included. I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel supported. I don't feel empowered." And then, you have all these organizations after everything has fallen apart saying, "Well, what do we do now?" Right? How do
I
we
mean,
get it back together? How do we build this up? How do
well,
we
yeah, I mean,
create
after the election, we got big corporations saying we're gonna get rid of DEI,
Mhm.
right? Because we don't need it because, Oh, so there was only based on a political choice?
Yeah,
So if one party gets in, you do it, one party gets other party gets in, you don't do it? Or is it actually a business decision?
correct.
Or was it actually just trying to take your finger in the wind and see which
Yeah,
way the wind blows?
and
Or are
and,
you
you know
actually making a business decision?
correct, and, you know, it's so much more important that we talk about this now, right? Because the diversity within this country is not going anywhere,
It's not going away.
and neurodivergent people have always been here. Whenever we do a training with companies, we tell them, "We know you're very interested to hire neurodivergent individuals, but you probably already have neurodivergent people here." Okay? So you have to start with recognizing that there are people already in your organizations who are masking, who are struggling, who feel like they don't have a voice, who feel like they're not getting the supports that they need. And they know that they work for an organization that doesn't have a culture of inclusion for them.
Also, like, you think about, like, the performance review in these
Mhm.
big corporations, if they don't value neurodivergence,
Correct.
right? If they just wanna put people in a box
Right.
and they're running an algorithm that goes with their HR system and is
Mhm.
created by some software company like I work for,
Right.
right? It does not value that
Mhm.
neurodivergence. And so then
Absolutely.
it's trying to put somebody in a box, and then you're probably pushing them away. You're probably
Mhm.
not getting it's kinda like if I equate it to if I'm in a band
Mhm.
and I got, like, a band leader who's like alpha,
Right.
he writes the whole song,
Yeah.
and then there's a bass player and there's a drummer and there's a saxophone player, and he tells everybody's gotta play the part exactly as he wrote,
Mhm.
versus a guy who creates a demo and then says, "Hey, you
Mhm.
know what? I trust my drummer, I trust my
Right.
saxophonist, I trust all the guys in the band. This is just a kinda sketch."
Right.
You feel you're free to feel what you think it should be.
Absolutely.
It's a lot more I've been in bands where, like, the second person leader,
Mhm.
I'd rather stay in that band than the other band is trying to dictate to me exactly note for note, because 'cause they're not
Absolutely.
valuing my ability as a musician, they're just telling me, I'm just gonna be a session player, right?
Absolutely.
And I don't wanna be a session player, I want to actually contribute.
Right, and, you know, it's so funny that you mentioned performance reviews because when I first I didn't even actually know I had ADHD at the time, but with my ADHD brain, I was involved in this committee and this training program and involved in other things that the organization was doing in addition to my job. And I've had performance reviews where someone said, "That's great, but you're not doing your job, and you're not doing these things, and you're not meeting these items." Whereas where I currently work, which is Neurodiversity Pathways, I work in a neuro-inclusive team now. One of my colleagues is autistic, one of them is a parent who actually has a son on the spectrum, and then there's me. And I work for a team now where they see what I do and they say, "Wow, Khushboo, how can we figure out ways to get you to do this more?"
But
Right?
they value you like, if you have, like, your secret, like, sauce, your ability, right? Your
Yes.
ability is to probably be able to
Mhm.
neurodivergent people can sometimes might appear to be, "Oh, you're not focused," right? You
Right.
might be all over the place. You might be
Yeah,
doing a lot of things, like, you might be having a lot of hats on.
correct.
But some organizations like, I can be in an organization I went to a smaller organization where sometimes I could be an architect, sometimes I do
Mhm.
QA, sometimes I do design, I do database
Correct.
work, I do whatever is needed at the time.
Yeah,
So it's like compared to a place of, like, they just valued one thing, but
correct.
I can do all these things. And if I go do all the things, they say, "Well, that's not really your primary task, so now we're gonna give you a bad success factor review."
Correct,
And I'm like,
correct.
"Oh, well, I guess I'm
Yeah,
not gonna be here. I'm gonna leave."
and, that makes a huge difference for neurodivergent people. So with the people that I coach who are trying to find jobs, I spend a lot of time talking to them about which environment would be right for them, right? So we're not just looking at what do you wanna do for a job, what kind of team do you wanna work with? Do you wanna work remote? Do you wanna work in person? Do you wanna do project-based work that's long term? Or do you wanna do, like, lots of different kinds of things. Like, these are things to think about that a lot of people will not consider, but it does affect your job if you're neurodivergent, right?
Yeah. I mean, I made a choice to be in organizations that
Mhm.
do project-based work,
Right.
and then I finally found an organization that was, like, permanent work,
Mhm.
but it was, like, small business, but they take on projects, and the projects are different all the time, and they have
Correct.
and so you do for me, it's like that's what I crave.
Me
I don't
too.
wanna just do the same, not that I couldn't. I have certain
Mhm.
skill sets I could just do design work all day, but I might
Absolutely.
wanna do something else. I might wanna do database uh,
Mhm.
administration, or I might want to do QA, or I might want to do UI design. I might whatever is needed. I like the kind of startup feel of an organization where they're like, okay, what can you do? What
Correct.
can you
What
like?
else is possible?
Yeah, could you
Where else
go
can you
learn?
take this?
Yeah, could you go get an AI certification and
Correct.
chat GPT and start integrating that into one of these workflows? Oh,
Yeah,
sure, I'll go do that because I'm interested. And boom, you do whatever you kind of
correct.
ramp up to what's needed.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way my job is now, but that's also one of the things that makes me a great coach for neurodivergent people, because when they come to me and tell me, "This is what I'm struggling with, this is what I wanna do," I'm the kind of person who says, "Well, have you thought about this? Let's look into that. Let's
Mhm.
Google this job. Let's look what AI has to say about this," right? How are other people preparing for these jobs? Let's, do some LinkedIn sleuthing.
Yeah.
And I'm actually a LinkedIn ninja, so I want to empower my neurodivergent students to use research to their advantage and really figure out how they can have that competitive advantage to show up with their strengths and say, I'm excellent at this. And I am someone who struggles with these other things, but this is how I work best. And these are the supports that I need so that I can be the most effective and show up as my most authentic self. And a lot of people have never learned how to do that. Forget even neurodivergent people. Regular
Yeah,
people
yeah, there's
don't
everybody.
know how to do those things, you
Well, it's
know?
hard because a lot of times we're living in a very kind of Wild West world now
Yes.
because of AI, because of robotics, because of automation.
Right. Right.
People who wanted to do like a task that was very repetitive or kind of safe
Mhm.
are now getting scared because
Right.
like the world now is looking for people who are neurodivergent.
Mhm.
Or they're looking for people who are willing to kind of ramp up in a kind of
Mhm.
startup mentality in terms of like
Yeah.
critical thinking, right?
Mhm.
Ability to kind of think on your feet, be in the moment, like a flow
Right.
state person who can kind of
Correct.
just, you know, ramp up to whatever needs to be done.
Right.
Where another person, well, I got 20 years of being able to be an actuary and I can do this.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
well, now we can automate that and AI does that. So what else can you do?
And it's a really scary place to be, right? Because what does this mean for all these peoples whose jobs are going to basically be eliminated, right? We're in a really interesting time right now and thinking about what kind of a society are we going to be if we expect everyone to work in the way that you described, where it's just steady flow state and just
Well, a lot of
ramping
people
up to
weren't
what's needed.
trained. They don't have an experience with that because they didn't have no one gave them the expectation, right?
Right.
They basically were told like, you're gonna be a cog in a machine. You're
Correct.
gonna be sitting in that cubicle.
Right.
You're gonna be doing this task on the assembly line.
Mhm.
You're gonna be doing this very kind of known thing, right? Where as a creative person, I love unfound sounds or
Mhm.
like newfound sounds.
Right.
Like, so I do sound design before I even write a song. I
That's
actually create the
amazing.
tone because I
Right.
wanna do something that's not in the box.
Correct.
A lot of people just, well, I'm just looking for the preset. I
Exactly.
and I'm like, well, it's a different type of person that says, "I don't wanna use the preset, I wanna make my own."
Correct.
It's a totally
And
different mindset, you know?
what are we gonna do without that human sort of touch to art, to music, to writing? We kinda have to think about that. What does this mean for our society if we do become so reliant on AI? What is
I
that?
think, yeah, I think there's some limitations to AI and some of
Mhm,
the tech bros out there, and I've
mhm.
talked to some of them, and they're like, "Well, we don't need actors. We don't need musicians. You can just use ChatGPT or you can use, Gemini, you can use any of the."
I don't know about
And
that.
I'm like, "Okay, what you're forgetting
Right.
is that every human being is your individual voice and your response to that point in time."
Correct.
When you go see a play in New York,
Mhm.
right, you see an off-Broadway play and see that actor, if you actually watched it every night, he's not doing those lines the same way every night. If you go
Absolutely.
watch that band in a club in New York, they're not playing that song the same every night.
Absolutely.
Problem with the
Absolutely.
automation is, like, it will actually do the song pretty much the same every day,
Right.
and you have a known thing, and maybe that's comforting, but to me,
Mhm.
it's boring, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of people will find it boring, and they'll find it, like, very rote, and
Yeah.
And I think eventually people will say, "Well, that's not really what I want." I've talked to an author that was looking at AI generated covers for their book, and it's like it wasn't speaking to them the way that an actual illustrator,
Mhm.
hands-on, face-to-face talking to them actually did a better job. And so I think people start to
Yeah.
see that that human capability, it's still valuable. So the
Absolutely.
tech companies would tell you the opposite because they get paid.
Correct.
If you
And,
use that, and the money goes from the artist to the token that's being
mhm.
used when you generate the prompt.
True. True, true, true. You know, what I was gonna say is also with the kind of work that we do, right? Very often, people who are working in AI will come and pitch to us different ideas for how AI can be used to support neurodivergent people, right? And oftentimes we'll listen to the entire thing and we'll come back to the question, but does the neurodivergent person learn to advocate for themselves? Because if you're just if you're just spurting out information that I can find on Google, are you really teaching me anything here,
Yeah, you're
right?
teaching yourself to do it yourself. It's like the whole idea
Yeah,
of,
and
like, when independence is, like, you learn how to build your own house, right?
exactly,
You learn
and
how to
that's what we
build your
teach our students. We teach them how to fish so that whether they're in this job or that job or in a family situation or dealing with an intimate partner, whatever the situation may be, they have the tools to advocate in all of those settings. But let's say, there's all these apps now that people are thinking up on how to find the right accommodation, right? But you and I both know that any one neurodivergent person's needs are just their needs, right?
Mhm.
That's not going to help everybody. So if, for example, I have a student who really needs to put their headphones in and listen to music and just sit in a dark room for a few hours to self-regulate, that might not be an option on your app,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You only the machine learning only knows what was trained on, and
Exactly.
every human being is so different. Like, if you had a therapist, AI
Correct.
therapist, it's only gonna use what it's learned up to that point.
Absolutely.
And if it's run into something it doesn't know, and it might go and do what they call hallucinations and give you a response because AI tends to wanna give you a response that you want,
Correct.
that it thinks you want. So
Yes.
it'll give you an answer, but that might not be correct. And
No,
so
you have to go back and forth for a long time for it to really understand you, right? And really think about what it is that you're asking. Recently I put on ChatGPT, what are some stories from religious texts about, someone being an underdog and coming out on top. And it shared so many random things with me that I didn't need to know or like that weren't
it can just wants
related.
to just satisfy you, and you might take it, "Oh, well, that's fine."
Yeah, they're like, "Here's a list of, like, a million things that are all somewhat related to what you're asking," but I don't think anyone had asked it that before, right?
Yeah, so it just tries to come up with what it thinks you want, and you have to
Correct.
do the refinement. It's like that's the thing
Yeah.
about prompt engineering,
Mhm.
like, in the tech world, it's like, we try to refine it so it'll work with a workflow,
Correct.
right? So it will actually start to do the case statements.
Right.
And the thing is,
Right.
like, the case statements are just based on what you know. And the
Yeah.
reason that there's an update every day on your iPhone or your Android is because
Right.
we didn't know that yesterday,
Exactly.
and now we do. Right? So now we make a change because we ran into a bug. We ran
Right.
into a situation we didn't do a case for
Correct.
because we
Correct.
didn't know. And the thing
Yeah.
is like, it only knows what it knows. It doesn't
And that's the thing, like, for example, if you look up information on neurodiversity, again, there is some stuff that we know that's out there that it can pull from information of, but it's missing those lived experiences. It's
Yeah,
missing
the nature
those, how did this person navigate the situation? Not just here's what to do and here's a recipe. It's like that doesn't apply in the long term, I
plus
feel.
it doesn't have like a therapist, like if you're a therapist or somebody who's
Right.
been trained, you know,
Right.
through rigor.
Exactly.
And then having that kind of, it's like when you go to the Socratic method of being able to kind of think on your feet
Right.
and logically, think about like, Plato and Socrates and,
Mhm.
all these like philosophers. It's like how the human mind works. It can kind of, in the moment, it can make adjustments.
Correct.
That it is still the most powerful computer on the planet is your brain.
Yeah,
But
it's that
people will try to,
deducing ability, right?
yeah, and the computer is still not there. It might seem like it's there
Correct.
because it gives you an answer, where before it wouldn't give you an answer.
Exactly.
But now it's like what it's giving you isn't always, a lot of times it's not anywhere near what you were looking for.
Correct.
Um, so that's what people have to understand is like there's a limitation. Like the business case for AI is not it's like the sexy thing.
Right.
Everybody wants to use it for everything. Kind of like
Yeah,
back in the 70s, everybody was using whatever, saccharin and everything. Is it
right.
really but does it taste good? No, it
Mhm.
doesn't. It's like it was a new thing because it's low calorie, but did you really like Tab?
Right,
I
right. I
don't think
mean,
you
I do
really
feel
did.
like we kinda have to play around with it to see what's possible with it, see how it can be improved if it can, and, figure out ways for it to work, but it does bring up a lot of questions in general about our ability as a society and how we're gonna move forward from this, right?
But
Employment is, like,
quick
gonna be
fixes
an
are
issue
always kind of
forever.
limited.
Sorry?
The quick fix is a problem. I think sometimes people take something that's a Band-Aid. It's
Exactly.
the quick fix. "Oh, it saves me money."
Right.
So then you get rid of all the experienced people, and then you run into a scenario where you needed that experienced person, but you dropped them.
Correct.
And so,
Yeah,
the problem is humans need humans. And it's also go back to Henry Ford. It's like, I've got to have employees that can actually afford my car.
absolutely.
So if you get rid of all the employees, like, well, who's gonna buy the product?
Correct.
Like, if it's an idea, it's like, "Oh, you got these tech billionaires saying, "No, nobody needs to work." It's like, well, who's gonna buy your product?
Correct.
Nobody's working. So you say,
That's
so
I
they still
mean,
gonna
that's a
work.
great question. That's a great question. I also feel like more than who's gonna buy your product, it's like, how much of your product included that knowledge and experience that comes from the human brain that it's now not going to have? Like, the quality of the product is gonna change,
But
like,
things
the
become
benefit of the
mundane.
product is
And
gonna change.
we might get to an era of things that
Mhm.
are very sameness.
Exactly.
Things that are just like or things that are too perfect, so you don't even want it. Like, would
Yeah.
you wanna watch a movie that's got the plot of a
Mhm.
CSI episode over and over and over again, and it's like, "Okay, but is that really what you want?" Or would you wanna see something like a Citizen Kane that comes along from an Orson Welles?
Yeah, I mean,
It's like that kinda unknown thing, like a guy like Orson Welles comes and does things that nobody had done.
mhm,
Film angles, a structure of a story. It had not been done in film before, and that's
correct.
the human, like, random thing. They like, the
Yeah,
human's gonna do that Citizen Kane moment. It's gonna
yeah,
put that thing out there that the computer can't do that. It'll do something
absolutely.
that you already know.
And, this is really interesting that you said this about the job thing because, when people use AI for their resumes, for example, okay, you can tell.
Yeah.
You can tell, right? And even if we talk till the cows come home about keywords and application tracking systems, how many people end up hiring individuals who aren't how they represented themselves to be on their resume?
Well, it's that human interaction with HR that really does it, because like, you might
Right.
get past the ATS and you might get past the keywords, but then when you
Mhm.
get there, I've heard people that use the AI is like, they get into the interview and then they can't really represent what's on the resume because they didn't write
Yeah, I mean, and you know what? That actually brings up another question. Why are we asking random interview questions that have nothing to do with the job, right?
it.
So, one of the things that we train organizations to do in order to be neuro-inclusive in their interviews is to ask the person to do an assignment or project that they might be working on if they were working, to show
What they
how you think through the problem, how you make decisions, how you really take the information that's presented to get something completed, and can you complete something on time,
Yeah. I
right?
think that's a good way to show me way, right? Because the problem is, like, if you're just talking,
Mhm.
people can kinda, depends how good a talker you are.
Right.
It's like, but if you actually you go to the show me state, show
Correct.
show you, like, I've been in a situation where, like, an IT is like, "Well, like, here's a give us a use case.
Mhm.
Go do the use case. Go do an activity diagram. Go flow this out, right? Show me that
Correct.
you have a logical thing and say, "Hey, here's this problem,
Mhm.
and then logical problem, and show me how you would come up with options to solve it on the
Correct.
whiteboard." So it shows your thinking, the way you approach it. And I've
Mhm.
gotten jobs on that, like based on that. And sometimes it's the
Me
stuff
too.
that like maybe I didn't even have on my resume, but I just had the practical
Mhm.
of living it, doing it.
Yeah,
You know, and I think that
absolutely.
is super important because we live in a world with like everything on LinkedIn is always looking for your acronym, looking for
Mhm.
your certification. But then if you get that guy in the room and then you give him that thing and he doesn't solve it the way the guy who maybe didn't have that on the resume, the
Mhm.
person they actually do it. Like if you don't actually interview that person, you miss them.
Correct.
So
Correct.
there's a lot of misses happening.
Absolutely, and, you know, it's, once we do all try to be the same, we see how that sort of affects our society and our workplaces and our culture, right?
Well, everybody's trying to be like on Instagram. They're trying to do the
Yeah.
cat video. Everybody's trying to do the cat video gets a million views.
Right.
And the thing is, it's like what I would say is like if I do an Instagram post,
Mhm.
right, from an episode of my podcast, and maybe it only gets like 100 views, but somebody that watches it, is a Grammy award winning producer, and then they call me and they say they want to be on the show. Well, just
Correct.
because I didn't get a million views didn't mean that the impact of my post actually got me, you know, it was valuable. But
Right.
people looking at the metrics say, well, you should give it up because you only get 100 views. It's
Yeah,
like
this is what
it's
we
not
call
always the
sheeple
right
behavior.
thinking.
Yeah. And you know, it's I feel like the attention and the intentionality with which people used to do things has been lost, right? People are so quick to, like, just click on the shiny thing and run towards what everyone else is running towards, where we can miss a lot of great things from being that way, right?
Also, it's like the attention span. I've
Yeah.
talked to authors saying I got to have something that's like 70,000 words. I can't do a 200,000 word book.
Mhm.
Like, how many things are lost because you can't do the 200,000 word book
Right.
because maybe it needs that many words to actually tell the story. The same thing
Yeah.
with, like, a song. Like, if you look at songs in the '70s, songs could
Mhm.
be, like, 15 minutes. It could be 9
Absolutely.
minutes, 7 minutes. Now people are telling you you can only do a 2-minute song. I'm a songwriter.
Right.
I'm telling you, like, I just get warmed up in 2 minutes. I got the
Yes.
bridge, I've got the different sections, I got the interlude, I've got song structure, right?
Yeah.
My song doesn't really kick in until you get to the 5 minute and 15 seconds. It's like, but you're telling me that your attention span's only gonna listen to 2?
Yeah. Right.
Like, really?
There and, you know, and that's the reason why we need people who bring different perspectives and have new ways of thinking about the world and have different ways of processing information. Because you know what? For every person who doesn't have the attention span for beyond 2 minutes, maybe there are people out there who want songs that are way longer and are not hearing anything like that out there in the market too.
Well, if you put it into the world, what happens because of the net,
Mhm.
one of the advantages is you
Right.
could put it in, maybe your local, you know, scene doesn't like it, but somewhere in Norway or
Mhm.
Australia, somebody digs it, and so you get the way the world works with music is that you put it out there on a
Correct.
platform that's not a big platform, but a platform that puts out, like, underground
Mhm.
music, then you actually find your tribe, because, like, law of attraction. Then
Absolutely.
there's a permission structure to actually put the art and actually throw it out there in the world versus somebody
Correct.
being scared to put it out in the world.
Absolutely. And, that's something that I always talk to with our students because many of them are trying to make their name. Some of them are artists, graphic designers, or people who wanna do, like, video game design and things like
Mhm.
that. And many of them just feel like, "Well, I have a portfolio, but no one's looking at my portfolio, and how do I get myself out there?" And I continue to tell them that you just haven't found your tribe, or you just haven't found the community that really appreciates what it is that you specifically do. But those people are out there, and I think
Yeah,
it's
you
easy
just
to
gotta
forget
find them
that.
because there's a lot of forums.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of, like, forums for, like, independent video games from fans,
Correct.
gamer video games, right? By independent gamers. My daughter shows me
Mhm.
them, right? Shows me these people are making their own games. I
Right.
didn't even know where it was, and she found it. It's like she's always finding these, like, little gems of these
Mhm.
communities of
Yeah,
art, and, they're graphic artists, painters, all kinds of people, photographers, like, and
yeah.
it just there are these scenes, kinda
Right.
like, back in the '70s, like CBGB's in New York City was a scene where the Talking Heads were found, where the
Mhm.
Ramones were found, where Blondie was found,
Correct.
where,
Correct.
so he had this very diverse club, very small club. He
Mhm.
had a band like Blondie, became super worldwide, you know, Ta
Yeah.
Talking Heads, like a totally different type of band. Even to this day, there's not a band like that, and
Yeah, and that's the
that
thing.
scene had that, you
And
know?
and, we won't discover people unless we have places where people can really share their talent and show up and be themselves, right? I think that's what the bigger question is with this whole discussion, sort of where we're going is, how do we continue to have those spaces where the blondies of our generation can be discovered? And are we holding space for those spaces to exist, right? Are we creating pathways for people to really be able to show who they really are,
I
right?
think people have to value, people's individuality,
Agreed.
If you only value sameness
Yes.
or what you think is like the problem is a lot of people have this permission, like, I can't be a singer, so because I don't sound like Marvin Gaye.
Correct.
Right there, then their judgment is like, well, if I don't hear something that sounds like at that level, then I'm not even gonna
Mhm.
listen to it.
Correct.
Versus the people who decided to listen to David Byrne,
Yeah.
sing like what those Talking Head songs, like nobody had
Mhm.
heard anybody sing like that
Right.
or do videos like that.
I mean,
And
there's a reason why we have so many genres of music, right? So many styles of music, so many different regions where music is so vastly different from, like, how it is here. Like, I grew up listening to Indian music, right?
culturally different, yeah.
Very, very different. And for me, it's like when we talk about listening to classical music, when I was younger, I used to listen to tabla and sitar, right? Which a lot of people here have never ever been exposed to those sounds or
Mhm.
even how beautifully it can blend with other genres, right? But
Well,
that
yeah, it's like
creativity and that
it's
curiosity needs to be there to really
well,
explore.
yeah, you have a lot of musicians that would go looking for, like, Peter Gabriel, he's looking for, like,
Mhm.
went to you got South African musicians that work with him.
Right.
They would look for world music and find, find these little, like,
Mhm.
nuggets, like, from all over the world. There's different cultures that music is, like, part of communication.
Yeah.
I had somebody on the podcast one time that was talking about they had done a lot of, like, archaeological, anthropologic, like, I'm not gonna
Mhm.
ruin it, but they were out there traveling the world, and they were discovering all these different indigenous groups, and they
Mhm.
were taught and music was so much a part of the culture
Right.
that you it was just ingrained,
Yeah.
and And that is so important when people like the whole community was involved in it.
Mhm.
And it's like another language because it is.
It is. It
Music
is.
is a language, and if you start to put it into tiers and say, "Well, it's only for this, only for
Correct.
that," then the problem is that you need to be as expansive and have some curiosity, and don't
Agreed.
let the corporate structures kind of dictate, like fast food, junk
Mhm.
food level stuff, where
Yeah,
then you don't value it. If you
absolutely.
don't value something, then it becomes like it's not important to your life. And so when you start to value the diversity
Right.
in anything, like there's a
Mhm.
lot, if you just value sameness, you get what you value.
Correct. Correct. And one of the things that when we do these presentations with companies, we'll tell them, look around. How many of us have the same eye color or the skin color, the same height, the same gender, right? The same whatever, right? Every single one of us is so different. How is it that we can possibly believe that our brains are the same?
Yeah.
We
And
can't.
yeah, I mean, that right there is like your brain is your ticket. Like everybody's,
Right.
it's their soul and their heart. Like as an artist, it's like it's
Mhm.
your brain, but it's their soul and your
Correct.
heart that's coming through. And it's like how it's expressed through your fingers or your voice.
Yeah,
It's like that is what is uniquely you, right?
exactly.
If you were doing
Exactly.
like an analysis technically, you would see that the patterns going on in your brain aren't matching anybody else. At the moment you're
Absolutely.
doing that work, it's like very different, right? You can't
Correct. And
prove
and
it.
we know from looking at brain scans how people's brains work very differently from each other. We have all the research to back it up, so why are we still doing things the same way, right?
I think people just like the for convenience sake,
Yeah,
put people like we said, the performance review can be a
yeah,
killer if you are not somebody that's an in the box thinker.
correct.
Like, and if your people judging you
Mhm.
can't value your contributions,
Right.
then you're like misaligned. You're
Exactly.
out of alignment. You're like out of tune. If I'm a musician, like I hear that
Right.
well, guitar's out of tune, right? It's
Yeah,
like that's what it feels like. It's like you're out of tune.
right.
Like it's not working. So
Yeah.
you can try to see if you can fix it, but maybe you have to like find a different environment.
Absolutely. But even though we do like things to be standardized, right? Let's just start with that premise that we do like things to be standardized so that things are simpler. Everybody knows what's going on. There was a time when sidewalks didn't have curb cuts for people on wheelchairs, right? Does that mean that people didn't need curb cuts?
Yeah,
No,
they needed it. They just didn't
they
do
needed them.
it.
And what it is that we're talking about is like someone standing on the top of the stairs, right, without an elevator or ramp, saying, "It's not that I'm trying to exclude people from wheelchairs, but, this is the way it is. This is how we do things." But here we are years later, curb cuts are there. They don't just support people with disabilities, they also support people who are elderly or people who have, you know, like crutches and people who are struggling in other ways and people who have strollers who are walking around the
Yeah, people
street.
are using like skateboards or bicycles or any kind of wheeled travel.
Correct.
It's like, yeah, it's just the idea is like a lot of times people did it because like, well, it's the easiest thing. It's the cheapest thing. A lot of
Exactly.
times it comes down to money. You
Yeah,
don't
but
have the
we don't
elevator in
realize
the
how
range.
these small things that we change can have all these ripples, right? Like a lot of our students are visual learners, and now closed captioning is automatically available on Zoom.
Mhm.
And AI is automatically taking notes on Zoom. How many people struggled with not being able to see the words that were being said out loud because of audio processing disorders?
Yeah, well,
Like,
now since AI,
how many of us use subtitles when we watch movies now?
I watch a lot of Korean drama,
Me
and it's
too. I
because
love
like
Korean dramas.
I just watch K dramas all day. It's like so because I was living in Japan, I was watching like J dramas. and
Yeah.
now I'm watching K-dramas, then I watch Chinese dramas. Because I
That's
was in Japan for
amazing.
2
I've
years, I
I've
have my
watched a few. I watched, like, Hana Yori Dango and Boys Over Flowers,
Boys Over
and
Flowers, yeah, I love
yeah,
that.
my first one was Goom Princess Hours or something it's called, but it was, like, a really old-fashioned one, so I've seen different ones myself, and, before subtitles, I didn't even know I had an audio processing disorder, right?
Wow.
Like, truly, to be honest,
Find
because
it very useful for the subtitles to actually watch movies and TV.
Mhm, mhm. But, it's like these things were sort of built for accessibility around one group, right? One need, one problem that we're trying to solve. But we can see when we create these changes in our society, what a big difference it makes for everyone,
Well, it
right?
opens up the art to, like, so many people, like, now there's tons of people who
Mhm.
actually appreciate Eastern cinema and TV.
Correct.
They did it's not just anime. Anime people liked even in the
Yeah,
'70s, but now it's opened up, like, I just like the cultural differences between East and West.
me too.
There's a lot of interesting
Mhm.
ideas that are not in our dramas. There's a
Correct.
lot of things that are cultural, but they're, like,
Mhm.
historic, or
Mhm.
there's mysticism that they'll
Yes.
throw into things that we don't
Yeah,
have in some of our stories. And I just like,
absolutely.
wow, I just like the creativity of having a different angle, of not
Mhm.
seeing the same story over and over. Like, it's not based on, you know, King Arthur, it's not based
Mhm.
on the Bible, it's not
Correct.
based it's like a lot of our stories have the same base over and over and over again. And
Yeah,
then I like seeing stories where I didn't know that because I didn't know the history, so then it's new to me.
correct. Yeah, and this is why that inclusion is important. Because if we don't invite diverse people to come in and share those stories, we're not learning from those stories. They're just there somewhere else where they're not accessible to us, right?
Yeah, I think
That's
it's
why we talk about writers' rooms being more diverse, having more people contributing to media. I earlier last year, I was having a conversation with someone about how to improve neurodivergent representation in media,
mm,
right? Which is a whole other topic that we can go into. I can talk
mhm.
about this for days.
Yeah, yeah.
But, one of the things I mentioned in that meeting is that when I was growing up, I really liked Sound of Music, and I recently watched it as an adult, and I noticed that song where they're literally saying, "What are we gonna do with a problem like Maria?" Like, oh my god, that's so traumatic to me now because it sounds like all the different ways how I, as a woman with ADHD, was judged my entire
Mhm.
life, being playfully discussed in the song where we're
Yes.
talking about she's irresponsible, she's clumsy, she doesn't show up on time, she's not dressed how she's supposed to be dressed. Like,
It's like
what?
shaming, it's a shaming song, but it's like, "Oh, it's in the play," so it's like people don't think about, sometimes the context, we kinda
Yeah,
ignore well, we don't, 'cause it was part of the culture. It's like
correct.
it's such a big movie, but then you
Yeah.
go back and you look at things, it's like, "Oh, maybe that's, like, inappropriate."
That's a little bit inappropriate, right? Or, usually the ADHD person is like a really smart sidekick, right? Like a side character, like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is the person at the SVU office who's doing the research."
Yeah, yeah, they're kinda quirky. They got the
The
quirky.
quirky, nerd in the office who's like, "I pulled it up. Here's what I found." And everyone's like, "So fast," you know? But we have to think about what those ways of only looking at that view of neurodiversity does for neurodivergent individuals who have very real struggles from having neurodivergent conditions, right?
Yeah, well, you need representation, like diversity, like in the
Mhm.
media, like when you see this, who are the protagonists?
Correct.
You
Who
know,
are the
who
protagonists?
yeah,
Good
why do you
question.
always see a certain type of person,
Yeah.
sex or, look as the protagonist? Like, how come you don't see other protagonists? How come you always see the
Oh,
certain the antagonists. Why are they always the enemy?
Mhm.
And then you can go through and watch a lot of film and start doing film history
Mhm.
analysis. It gets worse and worse, you go back, is like you see a lot like with African Americans, we're like,
Yeah.
I don't even know if I wanna watch this.
Right. I mean,
Like,
there's
if
so
you're
many
Native
problematic
American, you see it's like,
things.
I don't wanna watch that Western because
Correct.
it's like, it's just so bad. It's I
Exactly.
can't and
And, we like, of course, our stories are gonna change over time, but it's like we're still not really adapting to the way things really are, right? Because how many times do we see neurodivergent characters, but they're not out,
Mhm.
right? They're just there, but they're not out. We're not seeing anyone accommodating them really ever. We're not seeing other people in that media trying to do things to include them or improve belonging for them. Usually we're seeing them get bullied.
We're seeing a reinforcement of the stereotypes. Yeah,
Exactly.
because it's like, okay, well, that's the studio says doesn't wanna take a risk, so they
Mhm.
keep on using the same
Yeah,
archetype. It's like, you see a John Wayne story, they're still running it all the time.
right.
Like, they're still running it, and then you see some of these old movies, and it's like, it's just being run it's reinforcing a lot of
Mhm.
bad stuff, and people say, "Well, that's a classic," but
Yeah.
then it's like, it keeps on putting in that social structure is
Mhm.
being reinforced, and then when you try to do something new, it's like, "Well, that's not in the canon,
Correct.
so we
Correct.
gotta stay in the canon, and it's always gonna be type this
Exactly.
structure, this that's why I like to go outside of that and find
Correct.
something else.
I like to do that as well, but for me, I think really one of the reasons why I was born on this earth, Phantom, is to ask the question, why? Why do we do it this way? Why should I be the one to do this? Why are we doing it this way and not this way? You
Mhm.
know? And we need people to be asking those questions.
We need to kinda be able to have consumers start saying, "I want something else."
Correct.
Yeah, I don't wanna have to go watch a K-drama or a J-drama or,
Yeah.
Chinese drama to get my diversity of ideas and
Mhm.
concepts and people. I need to be able to see that in my TV here. That I wanna
Right.
see that on Netflix, I wanna see it on HBO, I wanna see it here. I
Mhm.
wanna see that type of diversity of, not just thought, but people,
Mhm. Absolutely.
because I mentioned that we need to see people represented the way they are in the real world, not just in your structured canon world.
Correct. No, it's definitely true, and I feel like we we think we find comfort in the things that we know, but truly, like you said, we crave the things that we don't understand. That's where the real learning happens, right? When you expose yourself into new situations and around new stories and hearing from other people whose voices we haven't heard from yet. And that's why it's so important, I feel, that we solicit that from our society, from our culture, and really ask people, well, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we changing this? Why do we have meetings this way? Why? Like,
Yeah,
because,
why can't we open things up to be a little bit more? Because my daughter's always pushing for, like,
mhm,
online galleries,
mhm,
and then okay, fine, then she created her own. So
right.
now she has her own thing, sister creators, and they do online galleries where they do these art, showings
Mhm,
and allow people with very diverse capabilities to be
mhm,
presented in a gallery that's open on the net.
correct.
And it, has, video and art, photography, and all kinds of ways to be able to put it into this virtual gallery that you actually the stuff is on
Absolutely.
the wall. You can click on it. If it's video, it opens up,
Mhm,
and then people get to see, the story of the artist. But it's like the idea that, the big galleries didn't want to think about that. It's like, oh, you have to come here.
right.
Because what I understand they want to keep their location and their whole thing
Yeah,
about it. But like, why don't you open things up? why don't you make it so that you can actually have a virtual
Mhm.
artist in your gallery? He was like, "Oh, I can't do that."
It's I mean, there we have a lot of things we need to kinda look at a little bit differently, or even allow people to have those aha moments where they think about, "Well, I never thought about it," you know? Why not, right? Many times we ask companies, "Why do you interview people with the question, 'Tell me about yourself?'" What does that even mean, right? Let's be honest. What does that mean?
What
Do
are
you
they trying
wanna
to get at?
know?
What are they
Like,
trying to
everyone
get
has a
at?
different way of answering that question, and
And what's the right answer?
every neurodivergent person who comes into our program says, "I don't know. I don't know what neurotypical people want from me, or what exactly they're asking because their questions are so open and so vague," right? A lot of
Mhm.
times I'll tell companies, "You have on every job description from your company a bullet point that says high attention to detail." And I tell them, "Do you know what high attention to detail looks like in the office? It looks like the person who's pointing out errors. It looks like the person who corrects you in a meeting because you said something incorrectly. It looks like someone who says that something's not ready to go because it's not perfect yet," right? These are other things that comes with high attention to detail. And so we really need to think about what we are asking for and if we're really being honest with ourselves about what we're expecting. Like, what is excellent verbal and written communication, right? And I'll ask everyone in the company, do y'all think you have excellent written and verbal communication? Do they?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the
Right?
problem is, like, what is it's kinda like they like to have these, like, rote phrases
Mhm.
that they just use because like, everybody else uses it, and
Right.
when you try to get behind it, like, what are you actually trying like, what is it that this position is actually what does this person have to do in this position?
Correct.
Like, can you be more descriptive as, like, instead of having these canned
Mhm.
responses, like, it's like if I'm a musician, right, and somebody tells me, "Well, you need to make that brighter."
Right.
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
In terms of
Explain.
sound, there's a lot of ways to do things bright. It's like, you gotta tell
Mhm.
me what you're looking for.
Right.
When you're so and you think you told me, "Well, it's bright."
Mhm.
It's like, "Well, you
Exactly.
didn't really tell me."
Right. I mean, you said a whole bunch of nothing, right?
Yeah.
I had a recent conversation with one of my students, and she and I were discussing how when you ask a neurotypical person a close-ended question, they never answer it. But if you ask them an open-ended question, there's very much a possibility that they'll answer the original question that you had.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
Well, that's kinda like a blue book exam to me. It's kinda like I always like the blue book
Mhm.
versus, like, the
The
multiple
multiple
choice.
choice,
'Cause
right?
I went to Bowdoin in Brunswick. It's like a small college, like an
Yeah.
Amherst, and there was a lot of blue book exams and oral exams, and it
Mhm.
was really that you got to show that you
Mhm.
actually understood and processed what you learned.
Correct.
And it wasn't about that you could remember things like in a SAT way.
Right.
It's actually a way that shows that you could actually apply your knowledge and that you
Exactly.
did understand it. And I think I that appeals to me
Me
as
too.
the way I think, so
Me
I think
too.
on that side of the spectrum because other people are like, "Well, I want to know it's black or white." It's like, well, it's not always black and white.
It's not always black and white. I mean, it was never black and white, right? It was never black and white. So the fact that we assume as a society that there are black and white responses to these things, and this is how we should measure intelligence.
Yeah, I think it's the wrong way to do it.
What? There's so many things that we've
You
touched on
miss a
in
lot of
this.
people. I mean, because you
Yeah,
think about it, Einstein was getting like D's,
correct.
but he look how brilliant he was. The way they
Yeah.
measured him on the test was not measuring how good he was, and that happens all the time.
Einstein was actually dyslexic.
Mhm. So
So
that's not gonna measure him right, that
mhm,
but, like, his brilliance was beyond the way they were trying to measure brilliance.
I
It's like a
agree.
lot of times the test is defective.
Agreed,
It
agreed.
doesn't actually represent it actually could show that the teacher's failing.
Right.
Not that the students are failing, but the teacher is failing.
Right. You know, and I actually kind of struggled with all of this. I did awfully on my SATs. I did awfully in my undergraduate degree. But in grad school, it was like straight A's. It was small groups, lots of written assignments, smaller classrooms, focused study on my special interests and what I'm really passionate about. I did so well in grad school compared to undergraduate. And I went to a huge school where it was like 300 people in an auditorium. And I really feel like it was a huge disservice to really showing what I was able to do or what I was able to learn because we don't really have inclusive education practices in the way we run our schools these days.
Yeah, a lot of it is just designed to kind of put through as many people as you can in a
Mhm.
standardized basis. Like that's the reason I went to a school like Bowdoin because like class size was like 15,
Yeah.
18 people.
Mhm.
Professor, I could actually go to their house because they lived on campus.
Right.
TA wasn't teaching the class, the professor was teaching the class. So
Yeah.
you could go after class and actually go to their house and talk to them.
Mhm.
And then,
Yeah.
then to me, it's like that, the community, because I was able to communicate,
Right.
I was
Me
able
too.
to like really understand the coursework
Yeah.
because I felt comfortable enough to be able to go to the professor, ask the other kids because it's a
Mhm.
small enough group of kids that like, oh, well, what does this mean?
Correct.
What is, and ask the teacher, like, let's have a
Yeah.
debate about what this means. So it's just, to me, it's like if you, when you're trying to mass produce something,
Mhm.
then you don't have the attention to detail that you might need for certain people.
Agreed, agreed.
And
And
some
I
people
do
might
feel
need
like
to see
people are making some strides in inclusive education, but we still have so like a long, long ways to go. Because like you said, you know, some people are visual learners, some people are auditory learners, some people are kinetic learners. Like they really need to work with their hands.
Mhm.
You know, many of my autistic clients are the type where they literally pull something apart to learn how it works.
Yeah, mechanical.
That's
Yeah,
that's not something you're gonna learn in a textbook,
no, you
right?
take it apart and put it back together. I mean, I was the kind of kid that like, Rector sets, pulling things apart,
Really?
putting
That's
things.
amazing.
I'm a techie kind of guy, but I like to take it apart to figure out how to work.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
I thought I was going to be an engineer, but I ended up
Right.
getting, I actually looked at it, but
Mhm.
ended up going into software engineering and then music
Yeah,
and sound design. I use a lot of the stuff that's, like I said, I do sound wave design. I
that's
have like
amazing.
analog synthesizers that actually are like very complicated and have wires that look like you're plugging wires into this and that, and you're like
Yeah.
overriding workflow. So it looks like you're a mad scientist
Mhm.
because you are.
You
'Cause
know what? I have actually the perfect person to introduce you to. I'm gonna message you about this afterwards, but I have a student who is also working towards learning coding and is very much into music.
oh,
And they
cool.
wrote an article about how music education can be taught more inclusively.
Yeah, I think it's real important to try to, get it because if you look at a lot of the
Mhm.
phenoms, guys
Correct.
like Hendrix, he couldn't
Right.
read music, but look how great, and he was doing stuff that was
Mhm.
out of the box.
Correct.
He was a left-handed guitar player, restrung his guitar.
Right.
The way he played his guitar with his finger position was not the standard way of playing,
Exactly.
and so he reinvented to fit his capabilities as a
Mhm.
left-handed player, and so that in itself is is just a total reimagining and why he sounds the way he does to this day, and other
Right.
people don't sound like him because he kind of redefined his instrument to fit him personally,
Yeah. Yeah. I
and when
mean,
people
even the
do
way
that, they
people
come out
learn
the park.
music is mostly through classical ways, right? And that's actually something that the student had reflected on and how not inclusive learning classical music is.
Well, it's very exclusionary, like,
Yeah,
compared to, like,
very
if you learn, like,
exclusionary.
jazz or the blues or you can
Mhm.
have a foundation to try to learn the scales. But
Correct.
a lot of black musicians, like, we don't, I learned how to read, but a lot of black
Mhm.
musicians, I know they didn't come from that classical training, it's kind of
Right.
from soul
Mhm.
and heart and the blues, right?
Right.
And that is more like getting in touch with your soul and your heart
Mhm.
and finding it and listen, like kind of learn, actually playing by ear. A lot of
Correct.
black musicians I know, they can listen to a record and they can pick it up and they know what it is when they hear
Yeah.
it. It's a different type of, and that skill set, you know, toe
It's
to toe with a classical trained person, that person
right.
can be exceptional in the field. They don't need
Yeah.
to be at Berkeley to do what they do. They can do it. They actually function.
Correct. Correct. And you know what? I actually have a student just like this that I used to work with when I was a clinician, and we had randomly walked into a piano store in the mall when we were just doing a community outing, and he went in there and just by remembering a Mariah Carey song, played it on the piano, had never taken a single piano lesson in his entire life. His mom ended up buying him a keyboard. We started, like, raising money or thinking about ways to raise money to get him a piano. And he's continuing to learn music still, and he's one of those classically trained people who's just, able to hear things and pick it up right away.
Yeah, it's a talent, and it can open up a lot of doors.
Mhm.
But there are certain people that say, "Oh, you gotta read the chart." And
Correct.
there's certain places like, well, like if you can't read it, then you can't get the gig.
Right.
Versus other people will say, like, if he can play it, then he can play it.
Correct.
Doesn't really matter.
Correct.
It's like if he learns it. So it's like some people just are
Mhm.
exclusionary rather than,
Exactly.
and so it says like if we based on how people learn the craft, why do
Mhm.
you have to be exclusionary about they got to read it on the sheet if they can actually do it? If they can do it,
Absolutely.
what does it matter? And that kind of goes into what we're saying with the work is like just because they didn't get the test score,
Mhm.
but if you actually give them the task,
Correct.
what if they do it?
Yeah, what if
What
they
does the
do it?
test mean compared to the fact that they can actually do it? It's like you could actually have more people. They saying you can't find workers. They're saying you can't find talent, but you're
Correct.
actually excluding so many people. You can't even get them into the conversation with the HR person because you
Mhm.
exclude them before they even can talk to anybody.
Agreed, agreed. I had a student who ended up getting a job as a data analyst, right? And when we were talking about his experience, he wasn't working in a data analyst position before, but he had incredible knowledge of Excel. So much so that he actually created a YouTube channel to show how to use different Excel
Oh, the
features.
tricks and trades. Yeah, yeah.
He had been adding videos to for years and years and years and years,
That's his
right?
resume right there.
Yeah, and then he shows me that he's been collecting statistics on baseball players for, like, a decade for this one specific team. He had it all on Excel, he was tracking the data, and it wasn't on his resume, and I was like, "You need to
Put
put
that
this
up
on
on
your resume.
LinkedIn. Put it up. It's like
Put this
that's
in
the
a
way.
portfolio. Bring
Yeah,
this up in the interview. Show them during the interview. Bring your
you'll get
laptop."
the job because that's what a data analyst does. Sometimes people they find
Mhm.
their way into something they don't realize they're doing it.
Absolutely, and you know what? I'm very pleased to announce that he is happily employed full-time as a data analyst in a startup here in the Bay Area and doing so well.
Well, because he's probably got that unconventional thinking that a startup needs.
Correct.
Because like if you've got that passion to kind of
Mhm.
do it from kind of this like you're self-taught, then
Yeah.
you have a way of looking at it that's
Mhm.
gonna add a lot of value. Because a lot of people would just kind of rote trained it
Exactly.
versus somebody who was kind of passionate about it
Mhm.
and they find their way into it.
Yeah.
And I think like we'll probably have to close now because I usually
Yes.
we're a little bit over, but like I think that's the key is like you
Mhm.
need to be aware that you might be preventing like your organization from moving forward because of your exclusivity. You're not
Absolutely.
being as inclusive as you might think you are. That
Mhm.
you're losing a lot of opportunities.
Correct,
And
correct, and I'm on this mission, so Phantom, if you can please share with the listeners, they can check out our book, Neurodiversity for Dummies, which
mhm.
is currently available on Amazon. We are actually working on our second book right now, And we provide trainings to organizations, to leaders, to managers, HR teams, anyone who needs training on understanding neurodiversity and supporting neurodiversity in their workplace. And if any of the listeners here are neurodivergent job seekers that are specifically looking for help to understand themselves and to be able to advocate for themselves in the workplace, we do have a program called Career Readiness Training at Neurodiversity Pathways. And if you Google us, you can learn all about it. Our next cohort will be starting in February 11th to be specific, in 2025. And, I'm trying to make the world a more neuro-inclusive one, Phantom. So anything you can do to help me with that, that would be amazing.
Well, I want to thank you for being here, and that link we have below,
Mhm.
that will be fully clickable. And so people
Excellent.
in the podcast, we're just live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And on those
Mhm.
platforms, you're able to click there. We're going to be on all the other platforms where you can listen to or check out a podcast by tomorrow. We'll share that landing page with you by tomorrow. But
Mhm.
I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Coach podcast. I know this is a great topic to be talking about today, very topical given the environment. And
Mhm.
I hope everybody's got an open mind and check this out. And if you're neurodivergent, I think you look up the opportunity here to connect with you.
Mhm.
And I think it's a great the mission that you're on, and I wholeheartedly support what you're doing.
Thank you
So
so much. I
thank
appreciate you.
thank you very much for being on the show.
Awesome.